when the CEO asked him, her voice cold as winter glass. "You're just a janitor. What could you possibly know about art?" She had no idea the man standing before her once played Carnegie Hall to thunderous applause. She didn't know he'd graduated from Juilliard at the top of his class, and the melody he was about to play, the one that would freeze her heart mid-beat, was a secret she had buried 16 years deep in a grave she visited every December. But when the scandal broke 3 days later, when the cameras came and the board demanded answers and everything she had built began to crumble, the question was no longer who he was. The question became whether the truth would destroy them both or save them. This is that story. The alarm clock read 5:47 when Garrett Hayes opened his eyes in the dark. No snooze button, no groaning protest. Just the quiet discipline of a man who had learned long ago that the world doesn't wait for anyone, least of all a 42-year-old janitor with a son to feed and a mortgage 3 months behind. He sat up slowly, feeling the familiar protest in his right hand. The scars were old now, 12 years settled into the skin like a map of all the dreams he used to have. The fingers still worked, mostly. Enough to push a mop, change light bulbs, fix the things that broke in the gleaming tower where he was invisible. But not enough for what they used to do, not enough for the stages he used to own. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms in a building where the radiator clanked at night and the neighbors argued in Spanish through walls thin as prayer. But it was clean. Garrett made sure of that. Clean floors, clean dishes, clean laundry folded in neat stacks, because that's what Amanda would have wanted. Amanda. 4 years gone, and some mornings he still reached for her side of the bed, still expected to smell her lavender shampoo in the bathroom. The grief had dulled from a knife to an ache, but it never truly left. It just learned to live inside him, quiet as a held breath. He moved to the kitchen, put the coffee on, pulled eggs from the refrigerator. Owen would be up soon. 8 years old and already showing signs of the man he would become. Smart, curious, too serious sometimes, the way kids get when they lose a parent young and learn that the world can take things away without asking permission. The coffee maker gurgled. Morning light crept through the window, weak and gray, December in the city. The kind of cold that got into your bones and stayed there. Garrett cracked 3 eggs into a pan, added a splash of milk the way Owen liked it, scrambled them slowly, watching the yellow turn solid, thinking about nothing and everything. Bills on the counter, Christmas 2 weeks away. The toy Owen wanted, that cost more than Garrett made in a week. But they would make it work. They always did. But Garrett didn't know that tonight in the gleaming tower where he cleaned floors, he would play a melody that would shatter a CEO's carefully constructed world. And nothing, not his careful invisibility, not his quiet life, not the safe distance he'd maintained for 3 years, nothing would ever be the same again. "Dad," he turned. Owen stood in the doorway, dark hair sticking up in every direction, wearing the Captain America pajamas that were getting too small but that he refused to give up. His mother had bought them. That made them sacred. "Morning, buddy. Sleep okay?" Owen padded over, climbed onto the stool at their narrow counter. "I dreamed about Mom again." Garrett's chest tightened. He kept his voice steady. "Yeah, what was she doing?" "Playing her violin, like she used to, remember?" "I remember." How could he forget Amanda on stage, her bow moving like it was part of her arm? Her eyes closed in that way she had when the music took her somewhere else. She had been brilliant. Not famous, not rich, but brilliant in the way that mattered. Pure talent wedded to pure love for the craft. Cancer had taken her in 8 months. Ovarian. By the time they found it, it had already won. Garrett slid the eggs onto 2 plates, added toast, set one in front of his son. "Eat up, school day." Owen picked up his fork but didn't eat. "Dad, yeah. Why don't you play any more the piano, like you used to with Mom?" The question landed like a punch. Garrett had known it was coming eventually. Kids always asked the questions you didn't want to answer. He looked at his right hand, flexed the fingers. Felt the old injury wake up the way it always did when he thought too hard about it. felt the ghost of what those fingers used to do. Beethoven, Chopin, Rachmaninoff. Pieces so complex they required years of training to even attempt. Juilliard had given him that training. 4 years of brutal discipline and soaring beauty. He'd graduated at 22, top of his class, with job offers from symphony orchestras and performance venues across the country. And then 3 years later, it had all ended in a single moment of crushing metal and screaming pain. Things change, buddy. People change. But you were really good, Mom said so. She said you played for thousands of people. That was a long time ago. But why did you stop? Because the stage rigging fell. Because my hand was crushed under 300 pounds of steel. Because the company that owned the theater settled the lawsuit for barely enough to cover the medical bills and then made sure I never worked in music again. Because I had to choose between fighting them and taking care of you. Because some doors close and they don't open again no matter how hard you knock. Life happened, Garrett said finally. Now eat. Bus comes in 20 minutes. Owen ate. Garrett watched him, this boy who carried Amanda's eyes and her gentle spirit, and he felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The weight of being both mother and father, provider and protector, the weight of making sure one broken dream didn't become two. They ate in comfortable silence. Then Garrett cleaned the dishes while Owen got dressed, brushed teeth, grabbed backpack. The morning routine they had perfected through repetition, through the necessity of moving forward even when you didn't want to. At the bus stop, Owen looked up at him. The Christmas party at your work tonight, can I come? Just for a little while. Garrett hesitated. The Whitmore Holdings annual Christmas party was legendary. Champagne and caviar and executives in suits that cost more than his car. Not exactly a place for an 8-year-old kid. I don't know, Owen. It's pretty fancy. Please, Mrs. Chen canceled sitting for me, and you said I could see where you work. Mrs. Chen, the babysitter, 68 years old and sweet as honey cake, but her hip had been acting up. She had called last night apologetically. No backup plan, and Garrett couldn't afford to miss his shift, not with Christmas coming. Okay, he said, but you stay close to me, and you're quiet. Deal. Owen's face lit up. Deal. The bus came, yellow and rumbling and full of kids who didn't know how lucky they were to have both parents waiting at home. Garrett watched until it turned the corner, then headed for the subway station. The commute took 40 minutes. 3 trains and a walk, long enough to watch the neighborhoods change from broken storefronts to gleaming glass towers. Long enough to feel the shift from his world to theirs. Whitmore Tower rose 70 stories above the financial district, all steel and glass and ambition. At night it glowed like a jewel. During the day it caught the sun and threw it back defiant. Garrett had worked there 3 years and he still felt small every time he walked through the lobby. He went in through the service entrance, down the concrete stairs to the basement where the maintenance staff clocked in, put on his gray uniform shirt with his name embroidered over the pocket, checked his assignment sheet, floors 40 through 55, the executive levels, where the real money lived. He pushed his cart to the service elevator, rode up in silence, stepped out into the hushed elegance of power, thick carpet, original artwork on the walls, the kind of quiet that only money could buy. For the next 8 hours, Garrett Hayes was invisible. He emptied trash cans, vacuumed offices, changed light bulbs in conference rooms, where decisions worth millions were made by people who never looked at his face. He scrubbed toilets used by men in $1,000 suits. He wiped fingerprints from glass doors. He existed in the margins, in the spaces between importance and oblivion. And he was good at it, not because he loved the work, but because he had learned long ago that how you do anything is how you do everything. His father had taught him that. A factory worker who came home bone-tired every night but who never complained, never cut corners, never gave less than everything he had. Work ethic, dignity, pride in a job done right even when no one was watching. These were the things that mattered, not the size of your paycheck, not the letters after your name, not even the Juilliard degree that now sat in a box in his closet, a reminder of who he used to be. But whether you could look yourself in the mirror and see a man who showed up, who kept his promises, who didn't make excuses. At 3 o'clock, his supervisor found him. Marcus, 56, 20 years with the company, a good man who treated everyone the same whether they wore a suit or work boots. Hayes, need you to stay late for the party setup. Overtime rate. You in? Garrett thought about Owen, about Christmas, about the bills. I'm in, but I'll need to bring my son. Babysitter canceled. Marcus frowned. It's against policy. I know, but I don't have another option. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Keep him out of the way, and if anyone asks, you never had this conversation. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret it. The party setup began at 4. Garrett worked with the decorating crew, hanging lights, moving furniture, setting up the massive Christmas tree that took 6 men to position in the lobby. The whole time his mind was calculating. 6 hours overtime. That was the toy Owen wanted. That was groceries for 2 weeks. That was one less thing to worry about. At 6:30, he took the subway back home. Found Owen doing homework at the kitchen table. Got him changed into his nicest clothes. Khakis and a button-down shirt that was slightly too big but clean and pressed. Remember the rules, Garrett said as they rode the train back. Stay close, be quiet, say please and thank you if anyone talks to you. I know, Dad. And if you need anything, you come find me right away. Don't bother anybody else. I know. Garrett looked at his son, 8 years old and already learning how to navigate between worlds. How to be small in spaces that weren't made for people like them. It wasn't fair, but fairness was a luxury they couldn't afford. They arrived at Whitmore Tower at 7:45. The party was already in full swing. The lobby had been transformed into something from a magazine. White lights cascaded down the marble pillars like frozen waterfalls. A massive tree dominated the space, decorated with ornaments that probably cost more than Garrett made in a month. Tables laden with food that people would barely touch. An open bar where drinks flowed freely and loosened tongues made promises they wouldn't remember in the morning. Garrett clocked in, got his assignment, keep the bathroom stocked, clear empty glasses, stay in the background, be invisible. Owen stayed close, his eyes wide at the spectacle. The food, the lights, the beautiful people in their expensive clothes laughing their expensive laughs. Is this where you work every day? Owen whispered. Yeah, buddy, this is it. It's like a castle. Something like that. They moved through the crowd. Garrett collected empty champagne flutes from cocktail tables. Owen followed like a shadow, careful not to touch anything, not to get in the way. Good kid, patient kid, the kind of kid who understood that sometimes you just had to be quiet and let the grown-ups do their thing. But then Garrett saw her. Victoria Whitmore. Even in a room full of powerful people, she commanded attention without trying. She stood on the mezzanine level, surveying her domain with the easy confidence of someone born to wealth and trained for leadership. 34 years old and already legendary in the real estate world, her father's daughter, his successor. Some said better than he ever was. She wore a crimson dress that was simultaneously elegant and daring. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that arrested you. Ice blue, sharp. The kind of eyes that saw through pretense and measured everything, everyone, calculating value and threat in the same glance. Garrett had seen her before, of course. 3 years of working in her building, but always from a distance, always in passing. A glimpse in an elevator, a silhouette behind frosted glass, never up close. Never in a way that required acknowledgement. To her, he was furniture, functional, necessary, invisible. And that was fine. That was safe. That was how it needed to be. Because Victoria Whitmore couldn't know that 16 years ago, when she was 18 and he was 26, he had watched her laugh in the sunlight at a summer music academy. Couldn't know that he had loved her from a distance even then, when he was nobody and she was everything. Couldn't know that the song her first love had written for her, the one she still treasured after Daniel Ashford died, had actually come from Garrett's heart and Garrett's hands. Some secrets were meant to stay buried. He turned away back to his work, but Owen had stopped moving. The boy stood frozen, staring at the dessert table 10 feet away, where a chocolate fountain bubbled like something from a dream. "Dad," Owen whispered. "Can I?" "One thing," Garrett said. "Pick one thing. Then we need to keep moving." Owen's face lit up. He moved toward the table, careful, polite, reaching for a strawberry. But the table was tall. Too tall. He stretched on his toes, fingers just brushing the fruit. And then his foot hit something wet, champagne probably, spilled by some careless guest who'd never had to clean up after themselves. Owen's feet went out from under him. He went down hard. The sound was small but sharp. His knee hit the marble floor with a crack that made Garrett's heart stop. The boy's face crumpled. Blood seeped through his khakis. Garrett was there in 3 strides. He dropped to his knees, pulled his son close. His hands moved automatically, checking for serious injury, finding none. Just a bad scrape. Just pain and shock and the kind of crying that came from surprise more than damage. "You're okay?" Garrett murmured. "You're okay, buddy, I got you." He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket. He always carried one. For moments like this. For the spills and cuts and small disasters that came with raising a kid alone. He pressed it gently to Owen's knee, applying pressure, his voice low and soothing. "Deep breaths. That's it. You're being so brave." Owen's sobs quieted to hiccups. His small hands clutched his father's shirt, and Garrett held him right there on the floor of that expensive lobby, not caring who saw or what they thought. His son needed him. Nothing else mattered. But then a voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Can you control your child?" Garrett looked up. A man stood over them. Tall, good-looking in that catalog model way where every hair was perfect and the smile never quite reached the eyes. Expensive navy suit, manicured nails, the kind of man who had never struggled for anything in his life and mistook his luck for virtue. Preston Lockwood, Victoria's fiancé. Garrett had seen his photo in the company newsletter. Private equity. The golden boy who was about to merge his firm with Whitmore Holdings through marriage and ambition. "This is a corporate event," Preston said, his voice tight with irritation. "Not a daycare. If you can't afford a babysitter, maybe you shouldn't have brought him." The words landed like a slap. Garrett felt Owen tense in his arms, felt the shame start to creep in the way shame always did when people with power reminded you of your place. But Garrett kept his voice level, calm. "He's 8 years old. He slipped. It was an accident. An accident that wouldn't have happened if you knew your place." Preston's eyes raked over Garrett's uniform with undisguised contempt. "Your maintenance. There's a service entrance for a reason." Owen's bottom lip trembled. Not from pain now. From something worse. From the understanding that came too early for kids like him. The understanding that the world divided people into categories. Important and unimportant. Worthy and unworthy. Us and them. Garrett's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in first. "That's enough." Victoria Whitmore descended the mezzanine stairs with deliberate grace, each step measured, each movement purposeful. When she reached them, she turned to Preston, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Her ice-blue eyes fixed on him with a coldness that could frost windows. "You don't have the authority to speak to my employees that way." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Everyone within 20 feet had stopped talking, stopped moving, watching. "Apologize." Preston's face flushed. "Victoria, I was just—" "Apologize," she repeated. The tone allowed no negotiation, no escape. "Now." Preston's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sorry," he managed. Directed more at the floor than at Garrett or Owen. Victoria turned to Garrett then, and for just a moment her expression softened. She saw the way he held his son, the care in his touch, the protective fury barely restrained in his shoulders. She saw something that felt dangerously close to recognition, though she couldn't name why. "Take care of your son," she said gently. "The first aid kit is in the executive lounge, 5th floor. Use the private elevator." She gestured to the brass doors behind the reception desk. "Take your time." Garrett's throat was too tight for words. He managed a nod, stood carefully with Owen in his arms. The boy was getting too big to carry, but Garrett carried him anyway. Through the silent crowd, past the staring faces, into the elevator that closed them away from judgment. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria returned to the party. But she couldn't shake the image of the janitor holding his son. Something about him felt familiar, like a ghost she'd forgotten to bury. And in 2 hours when he sat at that piano, she would understand why. She would understand everything, and her carefully constructed world would begin to crack. As the door slid shut, Owen whispered against his neck, "I'm sorry, Dad. You have nothing to be sorry for, buddy, nothing." But Garrett was sorry. Sorry that his son had to learn these lessons so young. Sorry that the world was built by people like Preston Lockwood and maintained by people like him. Sorry that being a good man, working hard, doing right, that none of it mattered if you didn't have the right last name, the right education, the right suit. The elevator rose, smooth and silent and infinitely removed from the life they lived below. On the 5th floor, Garrett found the lounge, found the first aid kit, cleaned Owen's scraped knee with antiseptic that made the boy hiss but didn't make him cry, applied a proper bandage, then sat with him on a leather couch that probably cost more than their car. "You okay?" Garrett asked. Owen nodded. "That lady was nice, the one in the red dress." "Yeah, she was. Why was that man so mean?" How do you explain class warfare to an 8-year-old? How do you explain that some people measure worth by the size of your paycheck and the prestige of your job? How do you explain that the world has always been this way and probably always will be? Some people, Garrett said carefully, judge others by the wrong things. They look at what you do instead of who you are, but that's their problem, not yours, you understand? Owen thought about it. "I think so. You're a good kid, Owen. A really good kid. Don't ever let anybody make you feel small." They sat in silence for a while. Through the windows, the city glittered in the December night. A million lights, a million lives, most of them struggling just like Garrett, most of them invisible to people like Preston Lockwood. But some lights shone brighter than others. Some people rose above. Not because they were born to it, but because they refused to be defined by circumstances they didn't choose. After an hour, they returned to the lobby. The party had grown louder, more champagne, more laughter. Someone had gathered around the piano, an old Steinway that usually sat covered and silent in the corner, more decorative than functional. A tipsy accountant was attempting to play. He knew 3 chords and played them with more enthusiasm than skill. People laughed, made requests. The mood was light, festive, removed from the tension of an hour before. Owen tugged on Garrett's sleeve. "Dad, yeah, can you play please just one song so I can sleep better?" Every instinct told Garrett no. Drawing attention, being seen, being anything other than invisible. It all led to complications, questions, exposure of things better left buried. But Owen was looking at him with those eyes. Amanda's eyes, full of hope and trust and the belief that his father could do anything. And it was Christmas Eve, and the boy had been so brave. And somewhere deep inside, in the part of Garrett that still remembered what it felt like to own a stage, to make an audience forget to breathe, to be someone other than a janitor. With a broken hand and broken dreams, that part whispered, "Just once, just one more time." "One song," Garrett said. "Then we're going home. Deal, deal." They approached the piano. The drunk accountant stumbled away with a flourish. People made room, curious about the janitor and his kid. Some smiled indulgently. Others looked annoyed at the interruption. Garrett sat on the bench. Owen slid in beside him, small and warm and trusting. The keys were cool under Garrett's fingers. It had been so long. Years since he'd played in front of anyone. Years since he'd let himself believe he could still do this. His right hand trembled slightly. The scars pulled tight. Pain flickered like an old warning. But then he closed his eyes, and he remembered. Juilliard. The practice rooms where he'd spent 10 hours a day for 4 years. The professors who'd pushed him harder than he thought possible. the competitions he'd won, the showcases where talent scouts had fought over him. Carnegie Hall when he was 23, the spotlight, the perfect acoustics, the feeling of becoming something more than human, more than limited when the music moved through him. Amanda in the front row glowing with the accident 3 years later. The crushing weight, the surgery, the doctor's sad eyes delivering the verdict. Never professionally again. The long, slow descent from concert halls to warehouse work to this. Janitor, invisible, safe, but still breathing, still alive, still capable of this one thing even if his hand would never be what it was. Garrett began to play. The melody that filled the lobby was unlike anything most of them had ever heard. It started soft, gentle as rain on glass, each note placed with such precision and care that it felt less like music and more like a conversation whispered in the dark. Then it grew, swelled, cascaded into something achingly beautiful, a prayer in sound, longing and loss and love so deep it had no words, only this. Only notes that reached into the chest and pulled at things people forgot they carried. Evermore Promise. He'd written it 16 years ago. A boy of 26 at a summer music camp watching a girl with honey blonde hair laugh in the sunlight while she held hands with his friend. Daniel. Brilliant, confident Daniel Ashford who had everything Garrett didn't. Talent that came easy, charisma that drew people like gravity. The girl, Daniel, had started the melody, 8 beautiful bars, but then he'd gotten stuck, couldn't find the path forward, and Garrett, invisible even then, had shown him, had taken those 8 bars and built them into something transcendent. Play it for her, Garrett had said. Tell her it's from you. I'll tell her the truth, Daniel had offered, that you finished it. No, she's meant for someone like you, not someone like me. So Daniel had played it for Victoria under the stars, had called it Evermore Promise because that's what he was making. Forever, always, a love that would last. 3 weeks later, Daniel was dead. A car accident, rain and speed and the cruelty of chance. And the song had died with him, or so Garrett had thought. He played it now with his damaged hand and his janitor's shirt and his 8-year-old son beside him. He played it from memory, from the marrow of his bones, every note a piece of his heart laid bare. The lobby had gone completely silent, and on the mezzanine level Victoria Whitmore stood frozen. Her hand gripped the brass railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Her face had gone pale as death, because she knew this song. She knew every note, every pause, every aching phrase. Daniel had played it for her 16 years ago, had called it his masterpiece, his gift, the last piece of him she had left after the accident stole everything else. She had never heard it played again. She'd forbidden herself from even humming it, terrified that if she let the grief in it would swallow her whole. But here it was, perfect, complete, exactly as Daniel had played it, except Daniel was dead. So how could this stranger, this janitor, know it? The final note faded into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the applause came, scattered at first, then building, people clapping because they recognized beauty even if they couldn't name it, even if they didn't understand why it made them want to cry. Garrett opened his eyes, found Victoria standing 3 feet away. She must have descended the stairs without him noticing. Must have been drawn by the music like a ghost to unfinished business. Her face was pale, her ice blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Where did you learn that?" Her voice came out raw, barely above a whisper. Garrett stood slowly, his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd known this moment might come someday, had dreaded it, longed for it, both at once. "It's just an old melody," he said carefully. "Something I picked up years ago." "Don't lie to me." Victoria's voice sharpened. Desperation crept into her tone. "That song, it was written for me, by someone who died 16 years ago. No one else knew it. No one could have known it." She stepped closer, searching his face for answers he wasn't ready to give. "Who are you?" Before Garrett could respond, Owen appeared at his side, sleepy, smiling, oblivious to the storm gathering in the air between the adults. That was beautiful, Dad. Can we go home now? Victoria's gaze dropped to the boy, then back to Garrett. She saw the fear in his eyes, the instinct to shield his child from her intensity, from questions that would unravel everything. She forced herself to breathe, to step back, to remember where she was, but as Garrett gathered Owen's coat and hurried toward the exit, Victoria stood rooted to the spot. The melody still echoed in her skull like a hymn or a curse. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, heard his voice promising her forever in notes instead of words. But now another image kept intruding. The janitor's scarred hands moving across the keys, the sorrow etched into the lines around his eyes. The way he'd held his son like the boy was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Who was he? And how had he stolen a piece of her past? Victoria Whitmore did not sleep that night. She tried, lay in her king-sized bed in her penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city that she had conquered through sheer will and inherited ambition. The silk sheets were cool against her skin. The room was dark and quiet. Every condition for rest was perfect, but her mind would not stop. It played the melody over and over. Ever more promise. Daniel's song, Daniel's gift. The last piece of him she had allowed herself to keep after the accident had stolen everything else. Except it wasn't just Daniel's anymore, was it? That janitor had played it. Note perfect. Feeling perfect. As if he had written it himself. She threw off the covers at 3 a.m, paced her apartment in bare feet and silk pajamas, stood at the windows watching the lights of the city blink and pulse like a living thing that never truly slept. How the question circled in her head like a predator. How could a janitor know a song that only 3 people in the world had ever heard? Daniel, herself, and Thomas Bradford, Daniel's mentor at the Summer Music Academy 16 years ago. Unless. Victoria's breath fogged the glass. Unless there had been someone else. Someone Daniel never mentioned. Someone invisible even then. At 5 a.m, she gave up on sleep entirely. Showered, dressed in charcoal slacks and a cream silk blouse. Made coffee she didn't drink. Sat at her dining table with her laptop and pulled up the employee directory for Whitmore Holdings. Garrett Hayes, age 42, hired 3 years ago. Position maintenance level 2. Previous employment listed as warehouse work, grocery stock. Odd jobs scattered across the city. No college degree mentioned. Emergency contact, Owen Hayes, age 8, son. No mention of music. No mention of education beyond high school. No mention of anything that would explain how a man who cleaned toilets could play like he had studied at Juilliard. But Victoria had learned long ago that what people didn't say was often more important than what they did. She picked up her phone, dialed. It rang 4 times before a sleep-rough voice answered. Thomas Bradford speaking. Thomas, it's Victoria Whitmore. I need to see you today. A pause. Then Victoria. It's 5:30 a.m. I know what time it is. Can you come to my office 10 o'clock? It's important. Does this have something to do with 10 o'clock? She repeated. Then hung up before he could ask more questions. She sat back, stared at the file on her screen, at the sparse information that told her almost nothing about the man who had somehow become the most important person in her world overnight. Garrett Hayes. Who are you? And why do you have my ghosts? Victoria arrived at Whitmore Tower at 7, 2 hours before anyone else. She liked it this way. The building empty and hers alone. The silence that came before the chaos of business. She took the elevator to her office on the 65th floor, unlocked the heavy oak door, stood in the space she had claimed when her father finally retired and handed her the keys to his empire. It was a beautiful office, all leather and wood and carefully curated art, a desk that had belonged to her grandfather, windows that showed her the city spreading out below like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. But this morning, none of it brought her comfort. She sat at her computer, pulled up the security footage from the Christmas party, found the timestamp when Garrett had played, watched it again and again, his hands on the keys, the way his eyes closed, the protective way he held his son beside him on the bench. And something else, something she had missed in the moment, his right hand. She paused the video, zoomed in. The image was grainy but clear enough. Scars, heavy scarring across the palm and up the wrist, old, years settled, the kind of scarring that came from trauma, from damage that had taken time to heal and would never truly be whole again. Victoria sat back, her mind racing. A musician with a damaged hand, a talent hiding in plain sight, a man who cleaned her floors but who played like he had once owned stages. What happened to you, Garrett Hayes? At 9:45, her assistant buzzed. Ms. Whitmore, Thomas Bradford is here to see you. Send him in. The door opened. Thomas entered with the slightly bewildered air of a man who had been summoned without explanation. He was 58 now, silver threading through his dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of quiet dignity that came from a life spent teaching others to create beauty. He had been Daniel's mentor, the man who had recognized the boy's genius and nurtured it until that rainy night when everything ended. Victoria, he said warmly. Then he saw her face. What's wrong? She didn't waste time on pleasantries, turned her laptop around, played the video. Thomas watched in silence, his expression unreadable. When the last note faded, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. That's remarkable, he said quietly. Is it Evermore Promise? Yes, it is. Daniel's song. Thomas replaced his glasses, met her eyes. Victoria, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 16 years ago, but I didn't because I thought it would hurt you more than help. Her heart clenched. What? Daniel didn't finish that song. The words landed like a physical blow. Victoria gripped the edge of her desk. What do you mean he didn't finish it? He wrote the opening, the first 8 bars. They were brilliant. They always were with Daniel, but he got stuck, couldn't figure out where to take it. He was frustrated, kept scrapping versions, starting over. Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. Thomas stared at the frozen image of Garrett Hayes on her laptop screen. And what he was about to tell her would rewrite everything she thought she knew about the boy she'd loved and lost 16 years ago. There was another student at the academy that summer, quiet kid, talented but overlooked. Daniel asked him for help. The other student took those 8 bars and completed them, turned them into something extraordinary. Victoria felt the room tilt. Who was the other student? I don't remember his name. It's been so long. He didn't fight for credit. When Daniel died, he just disappeared. I never corrected the record because I thought it would dishonor Daniel's memory. His name, Victoria said, her voice harder now. You must remember something. Thomas looked at the frozen image on her laptop screen, at Garrett Hayes sitting at the piano with his student beside him. It could have been him, Thomas said slowly. But I can't be sure. The boy I remember was 20 years younger, had his whole life ahead of him. What I can tell you is this: whoever finished that song understood love and loss in a way most people never will. He poured his heart into those notes, made something that would last. Victoria's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the desk to still them. Where is Garrett Hayes now? I don't know, her assistant said through the intercom when Victoria asked. He's not scheduled for a shift today. Victoria pulled up his file again, found his listed address, a building on the east side, 20 minutes by car. She stood, grabbed her coat. Where are you going? Thomas asked. To find the truth. The building where Garrett Hayes lived was nothing like Victoria's world. 4 stories of brick and broken dreams, graffiti on the walls, the smell of garbage and poverty, windows covered with sheets instead of curtains. She climbed the stairs to apartment 3B, knocked, no answer. She knocked again, harder, still nothing. A door opened behind her, an elderly woman peered out. You looking for Garrett? Yes, do you know where he is? The woman studied Victoria with the sharp eyes of someone who had survived by learning to read people, saw the expensive coat, the designer purse, the gulf between their worlds. He left, the woman said. 2 days ago. Paid his rent through the end of the month. Took the boy and their things. Didn't say where they were going. Left, why would he leave? The woman shrugged. Maybe he had his reasons. Maybe he didn't want to be found. The door closed. Victoria stood in the hallway, her heart pounding. He ran. Garrett Hayes had seen her at that party, had seen the questions in her eyes, and he had run, which meant he had something to hide, or something to protect. 3 days, no sign of Garrett Hayes anywhere in the city. Victoria told herself she wasn't obsessed. She was just looking for answers. But deep down she knew the truth. She was terrified he was gone forever. And then on the 4th night, piano music drifted through the empty building, and she ran. 3 days passed. Victoria barely left her office. She had private investigators searching, security going through footage, every resource she could marshal, trying to find a janitor who had vanished into the city like smoke. Nothing. Garrett Hayes had disappeared as completely as if he had never existed, and Victoria discovered something about herself that she had forgotten. Something she had buried under years of board meetings and merger negotiations, and the careful construction of a woman who didn't need anyone. She discovered that she was terrified, not of him, but of losing him, of never knowing the truth, of spending the rest of her life haunted by a melody and the ghost of a question she couldn't answer. Preston noticed. Of course he did. "You're distracted," he said over dinner at an expensive restaurant where the food was art and the portions were insults. "The wedding is 6 weeks away. We have decisions to make." Victoria pushed her food around her plate. "I need more time." "Time for what?" "Everything." Preston's jaw tightened. He was handsome in that catalog way. All the right features arranged in all the right proportions. But there was no warmth in him, no softness, just ambition wrapped in an expensive suit. Their engagement had been her father's idea, a merger disguised as a marriage. Preston's private equity firm, her real estate empire. Together they would be unstoppable. Except Victoria had never loved him, had never even pretended to. And suddenly, sitting across from this man who would be her husband, she realized she couldn't do it, couldn't spend her life next to someone who made her feel nothing. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, "I just need a few more days." Preston's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about that janitor, is it? The one from the party?" "Of course not." "Good, because that would be embarrassing for both of us." The threat was subtle but clear. Preston had his pride, his reputation, and he wouldn't tolerate being made to look foolish. Victoria said nothing, just smiled the smile she had perfected over years of navigating rooms full of predators in suits. But inside, something had shifted. Something was cracking in the armor she had built so carefully. On the 4th night, Victoria worked late again. The building empty except for security and the cleaning staff. She stood at her window watching the city lights and thinking about nothing and everything. Then she heard it. Piano music. Faint. Drifting up from somewhere below. Her heart stopped. She knew that melody. Would know it anywhere. "Evermore Promise." Victoria moved without thinking. Left her office. Took the emergency stairs because the elevator would be too slow. Descended flight after flight, her heels echoing in the concrete stairwell. The music grew louder as she reached the lobby level. She pushed through the door. The lobby was dim, most of the lights turned off for the night. Only the security desk still glowed, and there at the piano in the corner sat Garrett Hayes. His back was to her, his shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. He played with his eyes closed, the same song. But this time it sounded different, sadder, more resigned, like a goodbye. Victoria walked toward him, her footsteps soft on the marble. When she was close enough to touch him, she spoke. "You came back." Garrett's hands stilled on the keys. He didn't turn around. "I shouldn't have run," he said. His voice was low, rough. "Owen asked me why we left. I couldn't give him a good answer. He liked it here, liked the cookies the nice lady gave him in your office, liked watching the lights." He paused. I owed you the truth, even if you hate me for it. I could never hate you for playing beautifully, Victoria said. She moved closer. But I need to understand. That song, Evermore Promise. Daniel Ashford was supposed to have written it for me before he died, but Thomas told me Daniel didn't finish it. Someone else did. She stopped directly behind him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the scars on his right hand resting on the keys. Was it you? Garrett finally turned to face her. Up close, Victoria could see the silver threading through his light brown hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry, the exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. But his eyes, gray-green and achingly honest, held hers without flinching. Yes, he said simply. It was me. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Why would you do that? Why would you let him take credit? It was me, Garrett said. But that confession was just the beginning. Because the real story, the one about broken hands and stolen careers and 16 years of silence, that story was about to destroy everything Victoria thought she knew about her father. Because he loved you, Garrett said, and I was nobody. He stood slowly, faced her fully, and in the dim light of the empty lobby he told her the truth. I was at the Berkshire Summer Music Academy that year. Before that, I'd graduated from Juilliard, full scholarship, top of my class. People said I had a future, concert halls, recording contracts, the kind of career most musicians only dream about. He held up his scarred hand. My family had nothing. I worked nights washing dishes at a diner just to pay for my bus fare to the academy and back. But I had talent, and I had training. Juilliard had given me that. 4 years of brutal discipline and soaring beauty. I was going to make it. I was sure of it. He laughed, the sound bitter and sad. And then I saw you. You probably don't remember. Why would you? I was invisible even then. But I watched you laugh with Daniel, watched the way your eyes lit up when he played, and I thought, that's what love looks like. That's what it means to matter to someone. He turned his scarred hand so she could see the damage in the light. I wanted to give you something, even if you never knew it came from me. So when Daniel got stuck on that melody when he asked for help, I poured everything into it. Every feeling I couldn't express, every dream I knew I'd never achieve. I wrote a love song for a girl I'd never have, and I let him give it to you because he could say the words I couldn't. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. She didn't wipe them away. So you wrote a love song for another man to give to me? She whispered. I wrote a love song for you, Garrett corrected. Daniel just delivered it. He knew I had feelings I couldn't express. He wasn't cruel about it. He offered to tell you the truth, but I said no. I told him you were meant for someone like him, someone brilliant and confident and whole, not someone like me. His voice broke on the last word. And then he died. And then he died, Garrett echoed. And I let the song be his legacy because it made you happy, because it gave you something to hold on to. And I went home and tried to forget that I'd ever been anyone other than what I am now. Victoria stepped closer, close enough to see the grief etched into every line of his face, the weight of 16 years of silence. What happened to you? She asked. Thomas said you were talented. You said you graduated from Juilliard. Why are you cleaning floors instead of playing concert halls? Garrett held up his right hand again, flexed the scarred fingers. 3 years after that summer, I signed a performance contract. Small venues at first, building a career note by note. Then I got my big break, a showcase at a major theater. Your father's company, actually, Whitmore Productions. Victoria's blood turned to ice. There was an accident during setup, stage rigging. Someone had approved substandard equipment to save money. I saw it falling. Pushed the cellist out of the way. My hand got caught. He said it matter-of-factly, as if he was describing something that had happened to someone else. 3 surgeries later, the doctor said I'd never play professionally again. The bones didn't heal right, the nerves were damaged. The company settled quietly, gave me barely enough to cover the medical bills, then they terminated my contract and made sure I never worked in music again. Victoria felt sick. My father's company. Your father's company, Garrett confirmed. I didn't know who you were when I took this job. I needed work. Any work. But then I saw your name on the directory and I wondered, and then I saw you. And I knew. He met her eyes. I stayed because I'm a coward. Because seeing you from a distance was better than not seeing you at all. Because after Amanda died, this was the only connection I had left to the person I used to be. Even if it meant cleaning the floors of the building that destroyed my career. Amanda, Victoria said, your wife. 4 years ago, cancer. She was a violinist. We met at a music school where I was teaching kids for minimum wage. She saw me. Really saw me. Not the career I lost or the hand that didn't work right, just me. We had 8 good years together before the cancer took her. His voice roughened. Owen isn't biologically mine. She was pregnant when we met. The father wanted nothing to do with it. I adopted him the day he was born. He's my son in every way that matters. Victoria was crying openly now. For Daniel. For Garrett. For the cruelty of a world that broke beautiful things and called it business. I'm so sorry, she whispered. For everything. For my father. For not seeing you. For... She didn't finish. Because the lobby doors burst open, Preston Lockwood strode in, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, 2 men in suits flanked a third figure, Richard Whitmore. Victoria's father walked with the same imperious bearing that had defined his 30 years as CEO. Silver hair slicked back, charcoal suit impeccable, but his eyes, cold and calculating, held nothing but contempt as they landed on Garrett. So it's true, Richard said, his voice dripping with disdain. My daughter has been sneaking around with the help. Victoria stepped between her father and Garrett. What are you doing here? Preston called me. Said you were making a fool of yourself over some janitor who's trying to extort you with a sob story about an old accident. He's not trying to extort anyone, Victoria said sharply. And that accident wasn't his fault. It was ours. It was yours. Richard's lips curled. It was business. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the bottom line. The man was compensated fairly. Fairly? Victoria's voice rose. You destroyed his career and paid him barely enough to cover his medical bills. You ruined his life. I made a business decision, Richard corrected, and he was mediocre at best. If he'd actually had talent, he would have found a way to succeed despite the injury. Instead, he's cleaning toilets. Which is exactly where he belongs. Garrett remained silent, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides, but he didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Because what was the point? Men like Richard Whitmore didn't listen to people like him. But then a small voice cut through the tension. Daddy. Everyone turned. Owen stood in the doorway. He must have been sleeping in the break room where Garrett sometimes let him wait during late shifts. Now he stumbled forward, rubbing his eyes, drawn by the raised voices. Daddy, what's happening? Why is everyone yelling? Garrett moved immediately, placed himself between his son and the men who represented everything he had learned to fear. It's okay, buddy, we're leaving. But Preston stepped forward, his lip curled in disgust. This is exactly the problem. You're so busy playing house with this man and his brat that you've forgotten what's at stake, Victoria. Our wedding is in 6 weeks. Merging your company with my firm's investment portfolio will create a powerhouse, but if word gets out that you're involved with him... He gestured at Garrett with contempt. We lose everything. Investors will pull out. Your board will question your judgment. He turned to Victoria, his voice hard. It's over. End this now, or I'll end it for you. Victoria looked at Preston, really looked at him, saw him clearly for the first time. This man who wanted to marry her not for love but for leverage, who measured worth in dollar signs and saw people as assets or liabilities. Who would build an empire on the backs of men like Garrett and never lose a moment's sleep. This man who represented everything her father had taught her to value. And she realized something that should have been obvious years ago. She didn't want to become her father. Then let it be over, Victoria said coldly. I don't love you, Preston. I never did. This engagement was my father's idea, not mine. and I'm done letting him dictate my life. Preston's face purpled. You ungrateful. No. Victoria's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. Let's talk about gratitude. Let's talk about how you've sacrificed every meaningful relationship I could have had because they weren't profitable enough. Let's talk about how you taught me that love was a weakness and power was the only thing that mattered. She turned to her father. And let's talk about how you stood by and watched an innocent man's life fall apart because saving money was more important than doing the right thing. To Preston, the engagement is off. You'll receive formal notice from my lawyers tomorrow. Preston's expression twisted with rage. You'll regret this. I have evidence. Financial irregularities in your acquisitions. I'll bury you. Try, Victoria said, but do it from a distance. You're no longer welcome in my building. She turned to security. Escort Mr. Lockwood out. As Preston was led away, still shouting threats, Richard stepped forward. His eyes were hard as flint. You're making a mistake, Victoria. That man is a ghost, a failure. He'll drag you down with him. Maybe, Victoria said quietly, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Can you say the same? Richard stared at his daughter for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out without another word. In the silence that followed, Victoria sank onto the piano bench. Her hands were shaking, her heart racing. Everything she had built, everything she had become had just cracked down the middle, and she had no idea what came next. Garrett stood with Owen in his arms. The boy had his face buried in his father's neck, confused, scared, caught in a world of adult conflicts he couldn't understand. I'm sorry, Garrett said. I never wanted this. Never wanted to hurt you. Victoria looked up at him, at this man who had loved her quietly for 16 years, who had written her a song and asked for nothing in return, who had sacrificed his dreams to raise another man's child and never complained. I know, she said, and that's exactly why you matter. She stood, faced him fully. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we survive this. Preston wasn't lying. He'll try to destroy me. The board will panic. My father will fight me every step. She stepped closer. But I'm done pretending. Done choosing power over people. Done letting fear make my decisions. She reached out, took Garrett's scarred hand in both of hers. Thank you, she whispered, for the song, for being brave enough to come back, for showing me what really matters. Garrett's eyes shone with unshed tears. What do we do now? Victoria managed a small, tired smile. Now we fight, and we see if the truth is strong enough to survive. Outside, the city continued its endless pulse. Tomorrow would bring cameras and questions and chaos. But tonight, in the dim lobby of Whitmore Tower, 3 people stood together. A janitor, a CEO, an 8-year-old boy. Unlikely allies against a world that would try to tear them apart. The battle was just beginning. The morning after broke like a reckoning. Victoria Whitmore stood at her office window as the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. She hadn't gone home, hadn't slept, just stayed in her office replaying the confrontation with her father and Preston, feeling the weight of what she had done settle into her bones. She had chosen truth over safety, love over power. A janitor over an empire, and now the world would decide whether that made her brave or foolish. Her phone buzzed, then again and again. A flood of notifications that didn't stop. She picked it up, opened the news alerts. The first headline made her stomach drop. Whitmore CEO's scandal. Romance with employee rocks real estate empire. Then another, and another. Victoria Whitmore calls off engagement affair with janitor exposed. Whitmore Holdings in crisis as CEO chooses love over business. Preston Lockwood claims financial irregularities in Whitmore acquisitions. Someone had leaked it. Preston probably, or her father, or both working together to destroy her before she could destroy them. Victoria set down the phone. Her hands were steady, her mind clear. She had known this was coming, had chosen it anyway. Now she would face it. The headlines screamed scandal. The board demanded her resignation. Preston prepared his final attack. Victoria stood at her window and watched her empire crack. But what she didn't know was that Thomas Bradford was about to change everything. One press conference, one truth, and the whole narrative would flip. By 8 in the morning, reporters had gathered outside Whitmore Tower like wolves scenting blood. Camera crews, microphones, questions shouted at anyone entering the building. Victoria's assistant Diana appeared in her doorway. The young woman was pale but composed, loyal in a way that money couldn't buy. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting," Diana said. "This afternoon, 2 o'clock, they're calling for your resignation." "Of course they are." "Ms. Whitmore, what do you want me to tell them?" Victoria turned from the window, met Diana's eyes. "Tell them I'll be there, and tell them I'm not resigning." Diana nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think you did the right thing. Preston Lockwood is a snake, and your father—" She hesitated. "Your father built this company on broken people. Maybe it's time someone fixed that." After Diana left, Victoria sat at her desk, pulled up the files she had started compiling 3 days ago when she first suspected Preston and her father were working together. Financial records, email chains, meeting notes, years of corruption hidden in plain sight. Her father's legacy wasn't just buildings and profits. It was decades of cutting corners, destroying careers, sacrificing people for margins. Garrett Hayes was just one name in a long list of casualties. But he would be the last. Garrett sat in a motel room on the edge of the city, cheap, anonymous. The kind of place where no one asked questions as long as you paid cash. Owen was asleep on one of the twin beds, still dressed in his clothes from last night, exhausted from the chaos and confusion of watching adults destroy each other. Garrett hadn't slept either. He sat in the plastic chair by the window watching the morning traffic crawl past, thinking about everything he had done wrong. He had stayed when he should have left, had played when he should have stayed silent, had let himself believe for one stupid moment that maybe his story could have a different ending. But men like him didn't get fairy tales. They got motel rooms and jobs they could lose and sons they had to protect from the collateral damage of other people's wars. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Hello, Mr. Hayes, this is Thomas Bradford. We met briefly years ago at the Summer Music Academy. I'm calling because Victoria Whitmore gave me your number." Garrett's throat tightened. "I don't think I should be talking to anyone right now. I understand, but I need you to listen. The media has turned this into a scandal, but I can change that narrative. I have documentation from the Academy, proof that you were the one who completed Evermore Promise. Proof that Daniel Ashford asked for your help and you gave it freely. What good will that do?" "It will turn you from a scandal into a story," Thomas said. "From an affair into a 16-year love letter. From shame into something people can root for." Garrett laughed bitterly. "People like me don't get to be heroes, Mr. Bradford. We get to be mistakes that powerful people need to clean up." "Maybe, but Victoria isn't cleaning you up. She's fighting for you. The least you can do is let me fight too." Garrett looked at Owen sleeping, at this boy who deserved better than a father who brought chaos everywhere he went. "What do you need from me? Just don't run, stay, let the truth speak for itself." After he hung up, Garrett sat in silence. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, he felt like he was drowning. The first week was hell. Every morning brought new headlines, new speculation. Paparazzi camped outside Garrett's motel until a kind security guard from Whitmore Tower helped him move to a different hotel under a different name. Victoria's phone rang constantly. Board members demanding explanations, investors threatening to pull funding, lawyers from Preston's firm filing motions for emergency injunctions. But she didn't run, didn't hide. She showed up to the office every day at 7 a.m., took every meeting, answered every question with the same calm certainty. I did what was right, and I'd do it again. Meanwhile, Garrett struggled with sudden visibility. Reporters shouting questions when he dropped Owen at school. Former colleagues from his music days emerging to give interviews. some supportive, others opportunistic. Is it true you were a Juilliard graduate? Did you plan this to extort Victoria Whitmore? How does it feel to go from concert pianist to janitor to whatever you are now? He wanted to disappear, take Owen and drive until they found a town where no one knew their faces. But then Victoria would call, late at night, just to talk. Not about the scandal or the board or the headlines, but about small things. Owen's homework, a book she'd read, the way the city looked from her window. "You still there?" she'd ask. "Still here," he'd answer. And somehow that was enough to make him stay. By the second week, the narrative began to shift. Thomas Bradford called a press conference. Victoria watched it live on her office television, her heart in her throat. Thomas stood at a podium holding sheet music, 16 years old. And what he was about to reveal, the proof that Garrett Hayes was the true composer, would transform a scandal into the love story of the year. Thomas Bradford filled the screen, standing at a podium. Behind him, blown-up photographs from the Summer Music Academy, young faces, musical instruments, and sheet music. The original handwritten score of Evermore Promise. Thomas's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent his life in pursuit of truth. "My name is Thomas Bradford. Miss Thomas. 16 years ago, I taught at the Berkshire Music Academy. One of my students was Daniel Ashford. Brilliant, charismatic, destined for greatness. Another student was Garrett Hayes, a Juilliard graduate, quiet, overlooked, but equally talented." He held up the sheet music. "This is Evermore Promise, the song that Daniel Ashford played for Victoria Whitmore the summer before he died. The song everyone believed was his legacy. But I'm here to tell you the truth. Daniel wrote the opening 8 measures, but he couldn't complete it. He asked Garrett Hayes for help, and Garrett did what few artists would do. He poured his heart into completing someone else's vision, not for credit, not for recognition, but because he loved the girl the song was for, even though she would never know." The camera cut to close-ups of the sheet music, 2 different handwritings clearly visible, one bold and confident, one careful and precise. "After Daniel died, I let the world believe the song was entirely his. I thought I was protecting his legacy, but I was erasing Garrett's contribution. And today I'm correcting that mistake. Garrett Hayes is not a scandal. He is an artist who gave his gift freely and asked for nothing in return. He graduated from Juilliard at the top of his class, had a promising career ahead of him, until an accident at a theater owned by Whitmore Productions destroyed his hand and ended his dreams." Thomas paused. Let that sink in. And the woman who sees his worth isn't confused. She's seeing clearly for the first time, because sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones everyone else overlooks. The screen split, now showed footage from the Christmas party, Garrett playing, his scarred hands moving across the keys, Owen beside him, the beauty of the moment undeniable. Then another clip, an interview, and Victoria's heart stopped, because it was Owen. The 8-year-old sat in what looked like a community center. Someone had filmed him on a phone, asked him questions in a gentle voice. "Owen, can you tell us about your father?" The boy looked at the camera with those serious eyes that had seen too much too young. "My dad is the best person I know. He works really hard, and sometimes his hand hurts because it got broken a long time ago. But he still plays piano for me at night. He plays songs for my mom. She died. But Dad says music is how we remember people we love." Owen's voice wavered but held. An 8-year-old boy's words, "Being nice is more important than being fancy." Simple, true, and somehow those words would be the ones that saved them all. Because the board meeting was about to begin, and everything hung in the balance. "The lady in the red dress was nice to me when I got hurt, and people are saying she's bad now because she likes my dad. But I don't think that's fair. I think grown-ups forget that being nice is more important than being fancy." The interview ended. The news anchor came back on, and her voice had softened. "A story we thought was a scandal may actually be something else entirely. A 16-year love letter, an artist who gave everything and asked for nothing, and a woman brave enough to see past titles and tax brackets to the character underneath. Public opinion is shifting," she said. Social media is now using the hashtag #EvermorePromise to share stories of hidden sacrifices and invisible heroes. It seems Victoria Whitmore's choice has struck a chord. Victoria turned off the television, sat in silence. The tide was turning. Social media picked up Owen's interview. The hashtag #EvermorePromise trended. People shared stories of their own hidden sacrifices. Artists who'd been overlooked, workers who'd been exploited, blue-collar heroes who'd saved lives and gotten no recognition. Garrett Hayes had become impossibly a symbol, and Victoria Whitmore had become the CEO brave enough to see past class and credential to character. When the board meeting finally convened at 2 o'clock that afternoon, the tide had already turned. The emergency board meeting convened in the conference room on the 68th floor. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table. Old money, new money, investors who measured loyalty in quarterly returns and had no patience for scandal. Richard Whitmore sat at the far end, not officially part of the board anymore, but his influence still hung over the room like smoke. Victoria entered alone. No lawyers, no advisors, just her and the truth. "Gentlemen," she said, sat at the head of the table. "I understand you have concerns." "Concerns!" Bernard Matthews, the senior board member, slammed his palm on the table. "You called off your engagement to Preston Lockwood and took up with a janitor. The media is having a field day. Our stock dropped 4 points this morning. Investors are spooked. This isn't concerns, Victoria. This is a disaster. I ended an engagement to a man who was using me to manipulate this company," Victoria said calmly. "As for Garrett Hayes, there is no affair. There is a truth that's been buried for 16 years, and I won't apologize for bringing it to light." "The truth," Richard's voice cut across the room. "The truth is you've lost perspective. You've let emotion cloud your judgment. This company needs steady leadership, not romantic gestures." "This company needs moral leadership," Victoria countered. "Something it hasn't had in decades." She opened her laptop, turned it to face the room, began clicking through files. "I've spent the last week reviewing our corporate history, and what I found was systematic negligence, cost-cutting measures that endangered workers, settlements paid quietly to avoid lawsuits, careers destroyed to protect profit margins." She pulled up an email, her father's email, from 12 years ago. "This is correspondence approving substandard stage rigging for a theater renovation. Whitmore Productions. The rigging failed. A young pianist named Garrett Hayes, a Juilliard graduate with a promising career, was injured. His hand was crushed. His career ended. We paid him $40,000 and called it settled." She looked at her father. "The medical bills alone were $60,000. You left him in debt. Then you blacklisted him from the industry, made sure he could never work in music again." Richard's face remained impassive. "Ancient history, and irrelevant. It's relevant because it shows a pattern of treating people as expendable, and I won't continue that legacy." "Then you'll destroy everything I built," Richard said coldly. "No, I'll fix what you broke." The room erupted, board members arguing, some defending Richard, others questioning Victoria's judgment, the chaos rising like a tide. Then Bernard Matthews raised his hand. Silence fell. "Victoria, we appreciate your moral stance, but this board's responsibility is to shareholders, not to settling old debts. If you can't separate personal feelings from business decisions, perhaps you're not fit to lead." Victoria met his eyes. "Then vote. Right now. Do you want a CEO who protects this company's reputation at all costs, or do you want one who does what's right even when it's hard?" Before anyone could answer, Diana burst through the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you all need to see this." She turned on the wall-mounted television, changed it to the local news. The anchor was speaking. "Breaking news. The Securities and Exchange Commission has announced an investigation into Preston Lockwood's private equity firm for securities fraud and insider trading. According to sources, evidence suggests Mr. Lockwood was planning to use his merger with Whitmore Holdings to hide illegal transactions." If the marriage had proceeded, Whitmore Holdings could have been implicated in federal crimes. The room went silent. Victoria pulled up another file on her laptop, turned it to face the board. But if you need more than moral clarity, here's business reality. I've been investigating Preston for the past week. Here's documentation of 18 other incidents like Garrett's, workers injured, careers ended, settlements paid quietly, a trail of destruction spanning 3 decades. This is my father's legacy, and if this board forces me out for refusing to continue it, then you deserve what comes next. She clicked to another document. The liability exposure alone could bankrupt us, but I have a plan, a foundation to support workers injured on our properties, scholarships for artists whose careers were derailed, a complete overhaul of our safety protocols. It will cost money, but it will save our reputation and our souls. The room was silent. Finally, Bernard spoke. Richard, I think it's time you left. Richard's face flushed. I built this company and nearly destroyed it in the process. We've been reviewing the documents Victoria compiled. The liability exposure alone could bankrupt us. You're done. Richard looked around the room, found no allies, his empire crumbling in real time. He stood, straightened his suit, looked at his daughter with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. You'll regret this. Maybe, Victoria said, but not as much as I'd regret becoming you. He left without another word. Bernard turned to Victoria. The board votes to keep you as CEO, unanimously, on the condition that you implement the reforms you outlined. Victoria nodded. Thank you. Don't thank us, just fix this, and for God's sake, if you're going to date the janitor, promote him first. The optics are terrible. It was meant as a joke, but there was wisdom in it. The weeks that followed were not easy. Preston's firm collapsed under the weight of the SEC investigation. He fled the country. Some said Europe, others said South America. No one cared enough to find out. Richard moved to Florida, bitter, isolated. Occasionally he would call Victoria, leave voicemails she never returned. The relationship was broken beyond repair. But Victoria had other relationships to build. She found Garrett and Owen a proper apartment, safe, comfortable. A place where an 8-year-old could have his own room and a father could sleep without worrying about broken heating or unpaid rent. She visited often, brought books for Owen, helped with homework, sat at their small kitchen table drinking coffee while Garrett made dinner. You don't have to do this, Garrett said one evening. Check on us. Take care of us. I know, Victoria said, but I want to. Slowly, carefully, they built something. Not romance. Not yet. Just friendship. Trust. The foundation of something that might become more if they let it. Owen was the bridge. He adored Victoria, asked her questions about business and buildings and what it was like to be in charge. She answered patiently, amazed by his intelligence, his curiosity, his resilience. Do you think my dad will ever play piano in big places again? Owen asked her one day. Victoria looked at Garrett across the room, at this man who still worked as a janitor because he refused to accept charity, who insisted on earning his way back. I think, Victoria said carefully, that your dad is already doing something more important than playing in big places. He's teaching other kids to play. He's showing them that broken things can still make beautiful music. Because Garrett had started teaching again. Community centers, after-school programs, kids whose families couldn't afford lessons. He did it for free at first. Then Victoria, working through her new foundation, started paying him a salary. Director of community music programs. He tried to refuse. I haven't earned this, he said. You earned it 16 years ago, Victoria replied. When you wrote a song and asked for nothing, you've been earning it every day since. Let someone finally pay you what you're worth. He accepted. Finally. And slowly, so slowly, he began to believe he might deserve it. 6 months passed. Whitmore Holdings announced the Daniel Ashford Memorial Scholarship, funded by Richard's severance package, an act of atonement he'd agreed to under threat of criminal prosecution. The scholarship would support young musicians from low-income backgrounds. Kids like Garrett had been, Invisible, overlooked, burning with talent that the world might never see. The announcement made headlines, positive ones this time. Victoria Whitmore's redemption arc, the CEO who chose conscience over profits and made it work. Stock prices stabilized, then rose. Turns out investors liked companies with souls, and on a Saturday afternoon in June, Victoria and Garrett took Owen to the park. They bought hot dogs from a vendor, sat on a bench while Owen chased pigeons. The sun was warm, the sky impossibly blue. "I've been thinking," Victoria said quietly, "about the future. Yeah, about what it might look like. You, me, Owen, this thing we're building together." Garrett turned to face her. "And what does it look like? Uncertain, complicated, worth it." She took his hand, the scarred one, the one that held all his broken dreams and impossible comebacks. "I'm not asking you to marry me," she said. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time, but I'm asking if you can see it. A future where we're partners, where we face things together, where we build something that matters." Garrett looked at this woman who had chosen truth over empire, who had risked everything for a melody and a memory and a man who cleaned her floors. "Yes," he said, "I can see it." Owen ran back to them then, breathless and grinning. "Can we get ice cream?" Victoria laughed. "Absolutely." They walked together through the park. Three people who hadn't been looking for each other but who had found each other anyway. Building something that wasn't perfect but was real. That wasn't a fairy tale but was better. Because it was earned. 1 year later, Garrett and Owen walked onto that stage, and the melody Garrett was about to play, the new ending he'd written, would prove that some songs are worth 16 years to finish. 1 year after the scandal that almost destroyed them, Whitmore Holdings hosted its annual charity concert. The ballroom was packed, every seat filled, the air electric with anticipation. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a statement, proof that a company could change, that doing right could be good business. Garrett stood backstage with Owen beside him. The boy had grown, 9 now, still serious. But with more laughter in his eyes, more hope, more belief that the world might be kind if you were patient enough to let it. "You nervous, Dad?" "Terrified." "You'll be great. You always are." Victoria appeared in the wings. She wore red again, the same color as that first Christmas party. But this time it felt different. Not armor, but celebration. She had changed too. Still powerful, still commanding, but softer somehow, more human. The Ice Queen had learned to thaw. The board had voted to keep her as CEO. The company thrived under her leadership, not despite her moral choices, but because of them. She had proven that you could do well by doing good. "Ready?" she asked Garrett. He looked at her, at this woman who had risked everything for the truth, who had seen past his scars and his worn clothes to the person underneath. They had taken it slow. Coffee on Sunday mornings, walks in the park with Owen, conversations that lasted until midnight about dreams and disappointments and what it meant to start over. No dramatic declarations, no fairy tale romance, just two broken people learning to trust again. Learning that maybe, just maybe, they deserved something good. "I'm ready," he said. The lights dimmed, the crowd quieted. An announcer's voice filled the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of Community Programs Garrett Hayes and his son Owen." They walked onto the stage together, father and son. The piano waited like an old friend. They sat side by side on the bench. Owen's small hands found the lower keys. Garrett's scarred hands found the melody. And they played. Ever more promise filled the ballroom. The song that had started everything, that had connected past to present, grief to hope, loss to love. But this time the ending was different. Garrett had written a new coda, a series of cascading phrases that spoke not of loss, but of hope, of second chances, of love that waited patiently in the shadows until it was finally called into the light, of broken things made beautiful again. The audience was silent, transfixed. Some wept openly. When the last note faded, the applause was thunderous. Standing ovation. Everyone on their feet. But Garrett barely heard it. He looked at Owen. At this boy who had taught him that being a father was the most important thing he would ever do. That legacy wasn't measured in standing ovations but in bedtime stories and homework help and showing up every single day. Then he looked at Victoria in the wings. At this woman who had chosen truth over comfort. Who had shown him that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. After the concert, after the reception, after the photographs and the interviews and the celebrations, Victoria found Garrett on the balcony overlooking the city. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Rare and precious. Owen had gone home with Diana, who had become like a favorite aunt. The adults needed time to talk. "You were wonderful," Victoria said. "Owen did most of the work." "Don't do that. Don't diminish what you are." Garrett smiled. "Old habits?" Victoria stood beside him, close but not touching. The space between them charged with possibility. "I've been thinking," she said, "about this, about us, about what comes next. And I don't know. I don't have a plan. I don't have a strategy. For the first time in my life, I'm just here, present, willing to see where it goes." Garrett turned to face her fully. "I'm 42 years old. I have a 9-year-old son. I drive a car that's older than some of my students. 6 months ago, I was cleaning floors for a living." "You direct community programs for a living," Victoria corrected. "You teach children music. You give them hope. You show them that broken things can still create beauty." Semantics. Point is, I'm not the fairy tale. I'm not the hero who sweeps you off your feet. I'm just a man who's trying to be better than he was yesterday. Victoria reached out, took his scarred hand in both of hers. "That's exactly why you matter. Because you know that heroism isn't about grand gestures, it's about showing up. Being consistent, doing the hard work of being good when no one's watching." She squeezed his hand. "I don't need a fairy tale, Garrett. I need someone real. Someone who understands that love isn't just feeling, it's choosing every day, even when it's hard." "And you think I'm that person?" "I think you've been that person for 16 years. You wrote me a song and asked for nothing. You raised a son who isn't biologically yours and never once wavered. You lost everything and kept your dignity intact. Yes, I think you're that person." Garrett's eyes shone in the starlight. "I'm terrified of disappointing you." "Good. That means you care. That means you'll try." She smiled, not the Ice Queen smile, but something warmer, more vulnerable. "I'm not asking for forever right now. I'm just asking for today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. Can you give me that?" Garrett thought about Amanda, about the 8 good years they'd had, about how she'd told him on her deathbed, "Don't stop living when I'm gone. Don't stop believing you're worth loving." He thought about Owen asking when Victoria was coming over again, about the way the boy's eyes lit up when she brought books or helped with homework, or just sat and listened to him talk about dinosaurs or space or whatever obsession had captured his imagination that week. He thought about the melody he'd written 16 years ago, how it had taken all this time to find its proper ending, how sometimes the best stories took decades to finish. "Yes," he said, "I can give you that." Victoria rose on her toes, kissed him, soft and sure, tasting of champagne and promises. When they broke apart, Garrett's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For seeing me. For being brave enough to fight for this. For teaching me that maybe I'm worth fighting for." Victoria smiled. "You were always worth it. You just couldn't see it." They stood together on that balcony looking out at the city that had tried so hard to break them and failed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, the slow, steady work of building something real. But tonight, under the rare stars, they had this moment, imperfect, uncertain, absolutely true, and it was enough. Epilogue. 6 months later. Garrett stood at the piano in the community center. Around him, 15 kids aged 7 to 12 sat with instruments or waited for their turn at the keys. This was his life now, teaching, passing on what he knew to kids who might never play Carnegie Hall but who deserved the chance to try. who deserved to know that music wasn't just for the privileged or the perfect. It was for everyone who needed to say something words couldn't express. Owen sat in the back doing homework, 9 years old and already more mature than Garrett had been at twice that age. He came to every class, helped the younger kids, showed them fingering techniques his father had taught him. Victoria appeared in the doorway. She came often, not to interfere, just to watch, to support, to be present in his world the way he had begun to be present in hers. After class, the three of them walked to their favorite diner. Not expensive, not fancy, just good food and better company. Owen ordered chocolate chip pancakes even though it was dinner time. Garrett and Victoria shared a basket of fries. The conversation flowed easy, natural, like a family, because that's what they were becoming. Slowly, carefully, building trust one day at a time. The board approved the expansion, Victoria said. 3 more community centers, full arts programs, music, visual arts, theater. We're calling it the Second Movement Initiative. Garrett smiled. I like that. It was your idea, the name. Remember, you said every great piece of music has more than one movement. This is just the beginning. They watched Owen talk to the waitress, polite and charming, this boy who had lost his mother, but who had gained a father who chose him every single day. I've been thinking, Victoria said quietly, about the future. Yeah, about what it might look like long term. Us, together, building something that lasts. Garrett set down his fork, looked at her seriously. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying Owen is the best kid I know, and I'd be honored to help raise him. I'm saying I want to wake up next to you and argue about whose turn it is to make coffee and go to Owen's piano recitals and build something real. She took his hand across the table. I'm not proposing, not tonight, but I'm telling you where my heart is, and asking if yours is in the same place. Garrett felt tears prick his eyes. It is. God, Victoria, it is. I just didn't think I was allowed to want this. Didn't think I deserved it. You deserve everything, she said fiercely, and I'm going to spend however long it takes convincing you of that. Owen returned to the table, slid into the booth, looked between the 2 adults and grinned. Are you guys being mushy again? Victoria laughed. Maybe a little. Good. You should be. You're good together. Out of the mouths of babes. That night, after they dropped Owen at home, Garrett sat at his piano, the one Victoria had given him. Modest but well-made, perfect for their small apartment, he played quietly. Not Evermore Promise this time. But something new, something that captured this moment, this feeling, this slow, steady knowledge that his life, improbable as it was, had become exactly what it needed to be. Not a tragedy, not a triumph, but a story still being written, one note at a time. And in the other room, Victoria listened and smiled because some melodies take 16 years to finish. But the wait, she had learned, is always worth it. The best songs aren't the ones that come easy. They're the ones you build slowly, through patience and pain and perseverance, through showing up even when it's hard, through believing that broken things can be made beautiful again if someone brave enough is willing to try. This was their song now, his and hers and Owen's, imperfect, uncertain, absolutely true, and it was enough, more than enough, it was everything.